Now, today we're going to talk about the claims of egalitarianism thrown around in India by both Christianity and Islam. Before they came into existence, there was a universal inequality and belief in inequality. Automatically, people recognized the existence of different classes of age, difference between children, adults, and seniors who had different rights and different duties. In sex, there was a difference between men and women, and then among men between alpha men who were sexually active and beta men who were not, either because they were too young or because they were socially of a lower status. Slaves were not expected to procreate. Um, so for them too, you see, different rules could be in operation. But alpha men definitely had many more rights than women, but more duties also. At least to society, women had duties towards their men and towards their children. Then there were also differences in social class that has not always existed. In the Stone Age, everybody was a hunter or gatherer, and so everybody had to fend for himself. Together, also in society, but still within society, the ranks were like closely the same, more or less. It is roughly with the introduction of agriculture that you start having different social classes with owners and laborers, and that enough was produced to set apart the priestly class also. Anyway, so different classes were recognized, and nobody thought that this was an injustice. This was just the way it was. There have been a few egalitarian thinkers who started small utopian experiments with maybe a few families, but not more, and even that only rarely. This was especially the case in monastic communities, because if people came to live together and foregoing marriage and having children, then they could be more or less equal. Though within the order, you would usually also have a leader, you would have a principle of seniority. But still, you see, there were no occasions when inequality forced itself on you, which was there for householders. Think of caste inequality in India in the Gandhian and Nehruvian age. Congress leaders would show off how progressive and egalitarian they were by organizing intercaste dinners. And you had the local chamars or mahars or mazhabis or so come over and they would interdine, very progressive. And then after they left, the Congress leader's wife or personnel would clean up very, very meticulously to wash away the stain of these dirty untouchables. But there was a transitional phase from pure caste to the present situation where this was quite common. Now, that was a fairly easy gesture to make because, dining, okay, well, after it's over, it's over. Whereas you have a really consequential fact of family life, which is marriage. You want to marry off your daughter, well, to whom? Is it somebody socially superior or inferior? What are the consequences? How you deal with them, with that family, and so on? That has plenty of consequences. No, this is inequality in the Bible. So we're going to see how this all translates into the reality of the Bible. So the traditional worldwide hierarchy of age, sex, and social rank is absolutely fully there in the Bible. The sons have to obey the fathers, the wives have to obey the husbands. It's nothing new. You can't blame the biblical people for it. I mean, you see, in the West, modern feminists often blame religion for oppressing women. Well, that's not true. You see, even if you subtract religion, you're going to have some kind of oppression, probably, but certainly a sort of hierarchy and role division between men and women. Anyway, so it was fully there in the Bible and it was never questioned. The Bible never says, stop this inequality, treat men and women the same, and so on. That's not there. None of their concerns. I mean, the Bible is about God, about worshiping God. And specific for the Bible is an ethnic hierarchy. On top you have the Israelites themselves. Now, some people, and particularly anti-Semites, if there are any in the audience, are going to say, look, they think they are superior. Look, this is what we have against the Jews. They think they're better than others. But you see, that is common to all people. The Vedic tribe used to refer to themselves as Arya. They were specifically the Bharata clan within the Paurava tribe, one of the 5 tribes within the lunar dynasty, within the descendants of Manu, right? So it's only one specific tribe, and they think they are the center of the world. They call themselves Arya, and all the rest Anarya. So this is quite common. In fact, in many tribes throughout the world, in every continent, you often find that the name of the tribe is also the name of humanity, and that they don't even really consider other people as human beings. So, you see, if the Israelites already did the same thing, at any rate, they didn't do any worse than other people in the world. Now, below the Israelites, you have the Gerim, who are foreigners, but foreigners living within Israelite society, like guest workers, or occasionally foreign spouses of Israelites. So that was frowned upon, but okay. So if they were submissive towards Israelite law, then it didn't matter. And then they were also taken care of. You see, there are injunctions that, of course, Bible thumpers are very ready to quote, that you have to take care of the foreigners among you. And then they say, oh, you see, this is pro-foreign, this is pro-immigration, pro-open borders, and so on. Nothing of the kind. It only pertains to the foreigners who have submitted to Israelite law. And so it means these Gerim. By contrast, you have the Goyim, literally the nations, which refers to the real foreign nationals. And so them you have to keep at a distance. It doesn't say you have to murder them or anything, but you have to keep them at a distance. Then something else is that the biological continuity, the genealogy, is extremely important. This again is in common with all peoples in the world. If you are the son of the king, then you're special. Even if there is no hereditary kingship, still your status will be much better than anyone's. Your standing, your value in the marriage market and so on will go up because of your genealogy. So the Israelites at first do not have a king. They have a rule by judges, but they choose to have a king, and so they elect a king. They choose a king, and from then on you get hereditary kingship. Like Solomon is the son of King David. And so the Messiah the expected Messiah among the Jews, that's a role then taken upon himself by Jesus later, has to be a biological descendant of King David. That's why in the Gospel, the story of Jesus, the Gospel writer takes the trouble of elaborating that Jesus is a direct descendant of King David. Also in the priesthood, the priests have to be descendants of Aaron, who is the brother of Moses. Um, and again, you see, it's very specified that nobody else, nobody outside this genealogical tree should have any ambition for the priesthood. Then there is slavery. This is totally a matter of course. This is never questioned. And this is approved by God and sometimes ordered by God. If they go occupy a country, you see, God may give the order. In this case, you have to take them as slaves. Or in another case, you have to kill them. That's God's whim. And so God never says, oh no, stop. No, 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 you're about to take them as slaves. No, no, here I am to abolish slavery. That never happens. Um, there are injunctions to treat slaves well. The same can be said of the Quran and many other pro-slavery sources. But treating slaves well is something different from abolishing slavery. So slavery is not abolished. Then something that you can't say of every holy book, you can't say it of the Quran, for example, but you can say it about the Bible, is that there is a sensibility very close to casteism in India. Um, First of all, there is a general worldview. Even before we come to the organization of human society, there is a general worldview that underpins this caste division. There is an ideology of separateness. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind of cattle. You should not try to cross Western cows, humpless, with Indian cows, zebus or humped cows. Um, and certainly, you see these modern experiments of crossing a lion with a tiger or crossing a donkey with a horse. That's all absolutely not to be done. You shall not sow your fields with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. Now that's taboo. Um, this ideology also explains the food taboos that exist in Judaism and that have been partly, in a simplified form, taken over in Islam. There is an analysis, a famous analysis from like 50 years ago by a certain Mary Douglas, anthropologist, where she shows, you see, which animals are allowed to be eaten. Those who live in harmony with their element. You see, fish belong in the water because the water is flowing and the movement of fish is like that. Whereas shrimps live in the water, but they are not so flowing. So they are not in harmony with their element. Their form of locomotion stands out from their element, and so you should not eat them. Sometimes, since we talk about this, I'll just mention it in one sentence. The question of pork, why pork should not be eaten. This is true in the Bible already, as it is later in the Quran. So if you ask Orthodox Jews about this, they may try to give a modern rationalization, like, for instance, the fact that um, pigs are originally plant eaters, like their relatives, the elephants. However, they have started to become omnivores. They eat everything. Occasionally, they eat meat also. Now, their intestines are those of plant eaters, which means they are too long. In meat eaters, you have very short intestines to get all the waste material out as fast as possible. And therefore, pigs are rather unclean. Um, Now, anthropologists say that the solution is more prosaic, much less complicated, and has to do with status, which is maybe the prime motivator for numerous human actions and institutions, namely that pigs are characteristic of sedentary agricultural people. They chop the forest. Inside the forest live the boars, the wild pigs. So they are then homeless and they are grabbed by human beings and domesticated. So farmers who make fields where there used to be forests, they eat the pigs that used to live in those forests, right? So eating pork is typical for the sedentary agricultural lifestyle. Now, nomadic um, cattle holders, they used to look down on farmers. So they used to eat beef or they used to eat goats or sheep, and they used to look down on pork. And for them, pork was a hallmark of these despised sedentary people. And so the taboo on pork, according to many anthropologists, is really only a mark of standing, right? Okay, that was just between brackets. But so this whole purity issue was taken very serious, and it's logical because, or it ties in logically with the fact that the Hebrew word for sacred, namely kadosh, etymologically means separate. You know the word because you may know the Urdu word al-Quds, which is Arabic, al-Quds for Jerusalem. Quds is from the same root as kadosh, means the sacred one, the sacred city, that's Jerusalem. Um, so it means separate, just like God is separate from his creation. You see, in polytheistic schemes, there is a sort of shade over between the gods and the world. They're not really separate. Whereas in the monotheistic worldview, there is the eternal God on the one hand, and then he creates, but somewhere in time, like 6,000 years ago, and from then on you have the world. So you have temporal creation, which also ends at one point with the last judgment, and you have the eternal God. So these two are extremely separate, totally separate. There's nothing in common between them. So because of this ideology of separateness, you get an application in the human world, which is endogamy. Certain classes of people should not intermarry with certain other classes of people. And now here, this will sound familiar to anyone who knows from the inside the Jati system. So you have an application, you have endogamy within Israel, and even within the different tribes of Israel. There are 12 tribes, and Moses, you see, this didn't insist on very strongly, but still he did not want them to intermarry. For example, because that would create um, problems for their property rights. If a daughter inherits and she marries someone from another tribe, well, that's a bit of a problem. She's supposed to take that with her. And like I remember the case of the leader of the Dutch Communist Party, De Groot, after the war. Um, he had grown up in Antwerp, though both his parents came from Amsterdam. And his father and his mother were of two different sub-tribes of the Jews. One was an Ashkenazi Jew, the other was a Sephardi Jew. And in Amsterdam, in the Jewish community at the time, they totally frowned upon intermarriage between two. So when these two youngsters fell in love, they had to flee. You see, they had to move to the Jewish community in Antwerp, where nobody knew them, in order to be able to live together. Um, so this principle of endogamy was quite serious, and I mean, I'm sure in India you also know situations where you know people have gotten into great trouble because their families disapproved of their intercaste marriage. You have the cases of in temporal order. Rebecca. Rebecca is the wife of Isaac, that is to say, the daughter-in-law of Abraham, and she had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau. Esau was the eldest, and he should inherit the authority of his father. However, he had married two foreign wives, two Hittite wives, and Rebecca, his mother, was scandalized about this. And so she schemed, she did an intrigue in order to pass the family authority to the second son, because he was marrying his nieces. Yeah, he was marrying very endogenously. Then you have the case of Dinah. In most modern textbooks, you will find a little chapter about the rape of Dinah, saying that you see she was abducted, she was abused, and so on, and therefore um, her brothers had the right to kill the man and his whole tribe that had abducted her. Now that's not true at all. You just read the original. You see that Dinah had fallen in love with Shechem, who was not of their own tribe, and they make love. And then the next morning, she regrets it because she knows what happens to the girls in that situation. She's afraid, but then, fortunately for her, Shechem does the honorable thing, and he asks her hand in marriage. And so the marriage is arranged, and Shechem's tribe is totally accommodated. They're willing to blend with the Israelites, to become one with them. And since the Israelites have the custom of male circumcision, they all have themselves circumcised. Now, this is a difficult operation. It takes a few days to recover. So while they are ailing, the brothers of Dinah storm into the village and kill everyone, right? So that's how serious they take intermarriage. You know, they don't want it. Then you have the case of Moses. Here, there is a trespass against this endogamy. At one point, Moses, who is a big leader and can afford certain trespassing, he falls in love with a Cushite woman, dark, from Egypt or even down south. And so his brother and his sister object. You know, they say, you can't do this. This is against our endogamy. And then he gets a revelation from God, allowing it to him. Not in general, but allowing it to him, an exception for him. This is a scene we also know from the Quran. If you're familiar with the story of Zainab, um, Muhammad falls in love with Zainab, but you know she's also a problem because of the incest rules. She's too close of a relative. He shouldn't be able to marry her, but he wants her anyway. And his friends object. They say, well, you know, this is against the law, against our customs. So he gets a revelation that God says, okay, in this case, go ahead and marry her. Upon which his other wives point out that God is quite accommodative to you. He serves you whenever you want. Anyway, so the rule at any rate is endogamy. Another example is that when the Jewish elite is exiled to Babylon in the 6th century, and they return after the Persians have conquered Babylon, they find that many of the local people or the local Israel or Jews who have not migrated to Babylon, have stayed in the country and have intermarried with neighboring tribes. Now they demand that all those marriages are broken up or that they leave the country. Uh, if the couple wants to stay together, they leave the country, but preferably they break up. You see, the wives and their children are repudiated, but they don't want any ethnic mixing. It's also imposed or wished upon enemy tribes that they get bastardized, that their race gets mixed in order to break their pride. So there is a strong rule of endogamy in the Bible. Christian lawlessness. You see, I just sketched a few elements from the Jewish law, their food taboos, their endogamy rules. Now, to Christianity, that doesn't apply. You see, uninformed anti-Christian polemic often cites these Old Testamentic laws, and that's a big mistake. Like, for instance, if you quote from the Quran to say how violent it is, how intolerant it is, and so on, then somebody trying to be smart says, yeah, but the Bible also has this stuff. Well, the Old Testament has this stuff, yes. But the New Testament emphatically doesn't. And so Jesus himself already goes against the food taboos. And so he says, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. There's also a famous case of an adulterous woman who's going to be stoned. And Jesus stops the stoning. He says to the stone throwers, okay, now everybody who is without sin, he can cast the first stone. And so they all think of, they look at their own lives and they realize, okay, I know better than her, and they go home. Then you have St. Paul, who formally abolishes Jewish law, right? For Christ is the end of the law, that everyone who believes may be justified. So from then on, it is belief, it is faith in Christ, that he is the Son of God, that will save you, and not the observance of any law. About what to do, Augustine says it's not this myriad of ritual rules, it is love. Rather, the proper translation is charity. You see, love is a very sentimental and unclear term. Anyway, here I've put love. So, love and do what you will. That is to say, if in a particular situation you are motivated by love for the person concerned, then what you resolve to do is the correct thing, even if it doesn't follow any law. Right, so it's a very important thing to understand that what I just said about Jewish law does not count for Christianity. So all enumerations against Christianity from the Old Testament are dubious at best. Nevertheless, for the specific issue of equality, this makes no difference. Because the New Testament It's just as inegalitarian. They take existing inequalities for granted, like social hierarchies between the boss and his servants, the master and his slaves, and so on. These are all taken for granted. For instance, St. Paul says explicitly, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. There are a few strictures against national hierarchy, that one tribe feels better than the other. Particularly in St. Paul, he first recognizes that he's not just a general global human being. No, no, he's specifically a Benjaminite Jew. So he belongs to the Jewish people, and among them to the Benjaminite tribe. Nationality is taken serious, but it doesn't confer any privileges. However, social hierarchy is totally taken serious. Particularly now, if the Bible was for equality, it would, of course, abolish slavery. I remember seeing an American movie about the first Christians where a woman is asked by a man to her hand in marriage, and she puts as a condition that he give freedom to his slaves. Now, in some individual case, that may have been true, but this was certainly not a rule among Christians. Christians were not interested in abolishing slavery at all. When Christianity takes over the Roman Empire in the 4th century, it does not abolish slavery. It simply continues the practice. And very explicitly so, St. Paul says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear. And this a number of times. The letter to, I think, Philemon is a covering note with the runaway slave. That is to say, the slave has fled his Christian master, maybe because he wasn't treated well, or simply because of slavery. He runs away, he comes at Paul's place, St. Paul, and St. Paul sends him back to his master and tells him you have to obey your master. And then that letter that is still being read today is a covering note, a text which he gives along with the slave. Okay, please take this to your master. This emphatic Christian approval of slavery was also quoted in the 19th century when abolitionism was coming up. And so, first, of course, it was the free thinkers, the the religious skeptics who believed in equality and in abolitionism. Then it started influencing some Christians also. And against them, the die-hard slave owners said, look here, this is not Christian, because Christianity is emphatically in favor of slavery. And they were right. There are many writings by abolitionists who start by recognizing, okay, fine, what I'm now going to do is against the Bible, it's against the gospel, but, for other modern reasons, I need to abolish slavery anyway. Then in the 7th century, in France, there was a widow regent, who was holding the throne for her sons growing up. And because her husband had died, her husband Clovis II. So the wife was called Baldhilde, and she abolished slavery among Christians. So that is to say, you could still practice slavery, but you could only take pagans as slaves. That's why from then on, slave taking focused on the Slavs, who were a still pagan population in Europe. And that's also where the name slave comes from. Slave really is a Slav. Slavish is a Slavic term which means glorious. So they called themselves the glorious ones, but their name came to mean slave. And that same principle was then later, during colonization, applied to the colonial pagans, the blacks especially, but also Native Americans and so on. Now, about colonial Christianity, it is very important to diagnose the problem correctly. And here there is a problem I have to address. Very many Hindus lump Christianity together with the colonial experience. And they say Christianity stands for racism and slavery and so on. That is not true. During the colonial period, of course, it was in the zeitgeist, in the spirit of the times, to be racist, to look down on the natives, as they were called. And so that's a reality, of course. But that's not due to Christian doctrine. You can have Christianity without all that, just as you can have Hinduism without caste. Um, Father Roberto de' Nobili in the 17th century targets high castes for conversion. And this necessitates, he finds, that the churches continue to observe caste distinctions. So within a church, and there are two churches like that in South India, where they have different entry gates for high castes and low castes. Now, there was a struggle about this within the Jesuit order to which he belonged. Finally, Pope Gregory XV decides, and he gives permission to continue caste distinction in church. And you can't say, as some Hindu polemicists do, oh, Christians also have a caste. No, no. That is a compromise with existing Hindu practice. Nevertheless, it's very instructive because it's a concession that the Pope could only make because there was plenty of social distinction within Western society, within Christian society. You had the king, you had the nobility, you had the commoners, and you had the outcasts, the gypsies, and so on. So, them being very used to that, there was no problem conceding specific forms of inequality in India. Exactly the same counts for the British rulers. You see, they are credited with hardening caste consciousness because they divide people. Everybody in the census has to specify which caste he belongs to, which is often a complicated affair in the realities of Hindu life. And so with the British, these become hard and fast categories, and you get modern casteism. And this they could do, again, because they were used to class differences. In fact, even inside Europe, Britain is known for its very strong class consciousness. And if you're upper class, you know, your life is totally different from if you're working class. So this inequality was accepted far more than today. So Westerners were used to social hierarchy. Today that is no longer the case, and in fact today the spirit is a little bit opposite to that. What has remained, no, what has become far stronger recently, is Hindu bashing, or as Hindus have started calling it with an infelicitous term, Hindu phobia. Now, they often ascribe this to racism. You know, I see this on social media all the time. Somebody refers to a new article in the New York Times, which is very blatantly anti Hindu, and they say, blah, 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 this is racism. Now, this has just simply nothing to do with racism. And I know Western society from the inside. I know it has nothing to do with racism. It is totally anachronistic to say that. And so if you care about winning the debate, you better sharpen your arguments and make them true to reality rather than indulge in a moral equation of the 19th century when you could exult in feeling, oh, I am good because they are bad, they are racist, and I am not. Look how good I am. You see, it is that psychology that still motivates many Hindus to say, oh, it's racism. It has nothing to do with racism. And in fact, the psychology behind it is anti racist. And those who practice it also espouse anti racism within Western society. Anything that they think is a matter of racism, they are violently against. Now, what is happening in reality? You see, Westerners, Christians as well as post Christians, have maybe at first believed in slavery, believed in racism, then emancipated themselves from it, abolished slavery, phased out step by step systemic racism. But now they feel that, okay, because of our historic guilt, we have to continue fighting racist slavery till the end. Wherever we can find traces of racist slavery, we must do something about it. We must be on the right side of history. And where is racist slavery still in existence? Well, according to most uninformed Westerners today, this is in the Hindu caste system. And so that's why Westerners are anti Hindu, because of the caste system. As Mark Tully said, the BBC correspondent in Delhi, whenever I give a lecture about Hinduism and I say anything positive about it, somebody in the audience is sure to stand up and say, ah, Mr. Tully, I think Hinduism is a disgusting religion because of the caste system. So that's really what you're up against. In the past, you see, people thought of Hinduism as spiritual and so on, all very nice. And the last 50 years, the reputation of Hinduism has suffered enormously and has come to be identified entirely with caste. Between brackets, a second factor has been added to it the last 20, 30 years, which is the fight against so-called Islamophobia. Many Westerners, are progressive and anti-racist and so on. They are also against Islamophobia. That is to say, any resistance against Islamic aggression. That's what they call Islamophobia. And where do they find it very explicitly? Well, in political Hinduism. So that's another reason to be anti-Hindu. But so the main one is the caste system. And so that's why they keep fighting it. That's why it's very important to set the record straight about caste and inequality within Hinduism, and the same within Christianity. And Christianity has a strong tradition of inequality. Um, in Islam, similarly, Islam brings a hierarchy, just as Christianity did, a hierarchy between believers and non-believers. Now, in the case of Islam, it is a bit radicalized, and there are some specifics to it. Muslims are bound to go to heaven. That's in Christianity too. You see, insiders are bound to go to heaven. Like, for instance, me, I've been baptized. I don't really believe anymore, but okay, this baptism can't be undone according to Christian theology, which means that I'm going to go to heaven. Whereas you people, not having been baptized, you are all going to hell. Aha. So me, according to some medieval theologian, one of the great things of being in heaven is that you can look down towards hell and see those sinners suffering. those unbelievers in the fire. But you people are going to have a good time down there because hell is an eternal Agnihotra. It's a constant fire sacrifice. So that may be the good side of it. Anyway, in Muslims, in Islam, the same rule counts, except that I'm on the other side. I'm also one of the unbelievers, so I'll have to join you people in hell. Um, they're not only bound for heaven in the afterlife, they're also destined to rule the earth in this life, whereas everybody else has to obey them. Everybody else is two categories of people, Christians and Jews. They are also unbelievers, but they are closer to Islam. They're also monotheistic, though in the case of Christianity, that is again a matter of dispute. Some say that Christians have three gods, that Jesus and the Holy Ghost are also gods. Anyway, um, but so they're not idolaters, whereas the pagans, the polytheists, the idolaters, they should not ever be tolerated. They should simply be killed and go to hell, or convert to Islam. Now, in the case of the two most important Muslim empires, the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire, at least for the last 500 years, there was one of the four Sunni law schools in power, namely the Hanafi school, and they say that the rule for dhimmi, for tolerated non-Muslims, may be extended to full pagans, but Hindus are also tolerated. Tolerated means that they have to pay a toleration tax and they have to abide by a number of rules, like not riding a horse when there is a Muslim on foot nearby. So, in the case of India, Hindus have joined the dhimmi category, the tolerated non-Muslims. Unbelievers can be taken as slaves if, while slaves, they convert to Islam. That does not set them free. However, the children fathered upon a slave woman by a Muslim father, they will become free. But even among Muslims, there is no equality either. You see, again, this simple inequality between elders and kids, between men and women, and so on, that you find all over the world, that's also very much there in Islam. And whereas elsewhere it can be reformed because of new circumstances, like the emancipation of women in the modern age, in Islam it cannot be reformed because it's a religion, and they think that these laws are made by God and therefore cannot be changed. So it is said in the Quran, we elevate some people several steps higher than other people so that they can look upon these others as their inferiors. It is said, your Lord gives in abundance to whom he wants and sparsely to whom he chooses. And it says, to some God has given more than to others. Those he has thus privileged shall not grant their slaves an equal share of what they themselves have. Would they deny God's goodness? God's goodness meaning the goodness towards them by giving them privileges. So it is a form of ingratitude towards God if you, as a privileged person, want equality. So equality is a very modern concept. It already wasn't there in any pre-modern religion. It was a bit hardened, made more serious, given more teeth. Inequality, I mean. Inequality was given more teeth in the case of Islam. Um, but so Even beyond that, if you care for full equality in a modern sense, looking for it in any old religion is in vain, even in Hinduism. Today, equality or human rights, is often looked at a bit contemptuously because it is taken to such ridiculous lengths. Nowadays, the woke movement, the ultra progressive people in America, want all kinds of equality that are just not realistic, are just not sensible anymore, like equality of outcomes. You see, you can have equality of opportunity. Everybody gets an opportunity. Everybody is allowed to go to school, for example. That's true now. That was not always true in the past. And then you have to fend for yourself. You have to study well. If you mess up, if you neglect it and you don't succeed, well, then that's an equality of outcome, an inequality of outcome that is justified. You've had your chance. Now, if you want everybody to come out on top, you know, like there was an American policy directive, 20 years ago or so, saying that education should be reformed in such a way that everybody comes out as better than average. Now, that is by definition impossible. Average means that half is underneath. So, um, so yes, you can take the equality principle too far, but essentially it makes sense. And so, as a juridical principle, it is quite all right. That's, by the way, why I think Hindus should continue to go for to campaign for the redressing of anti-Hindu inequalities in the constitution. You see, there should be equality also between the members of different religions, which is not there today in the so-called secular state of India. So equality is a fine concept, but it's not there in the old religions, and in some very specific forms, it's not there in Christianity and Islam. So we're almost there. In a modern age, because of Enlightenment notions of equality, some religions have tried to adapt. Now, in polemics, you will see Muslims say that Islam brought equality to it. That is total nonsense. And apart from these polemical claims, there is no serious work going on in Islam to make it true, somewhat, to make Islam more egalitarian. In modern societies, Muslims often find that their wives, their daughters end up taking a job, for instance, which used to not be the case. So they have to adapt. But that's not because Islam allows for it. Islam has not evolved in this respect. Some Muslims have evolved because society around them is evolved. But Islam has made no real steps towards equality. Christianity has, though of course these gains are not really Christian. Um, so since Enlightenment, for example, before that Christians all accepted slavery, then you get an increasing faction of Christians who says, no, you see, slavery, we can't have this. And then they apply other principles from Christianity, because it's a very big, broad-based religion with many elements. So you can pick up some elements unrelated to slavery and then find some anti-slavery implications in it. Like Christianity is all for charity, about being nice to people. Well, it's not nice to people to enslave them. They also find a theological ground, namely, like he said, that everyone is created in the image of God. Everybody, both those who have ended up as slaves and the rest. So they said, well, this is a form of equality. That's why we shouldn't have uh, slavery. So in Christianity, for instance, they were also against democracy, strongly against democracy. They were all wedded to monarchy and the ancient, aristocracy and so on. But then in the modern age, some of them started taking to democracy, and now only Christian democracy is viable in politics. Um, okay, that's for Christianity. The same thing you have in the East, like just one sentence about this. Kang You-wei, a Chinese reformer, wrote a book which he had to write in exile. He was being prosecuted in China. So it was in India, during his stay in India, in 1902, that he finished a book called Ta Tong Shu, the Book of the Great Equality, wherein he bases an egalitarian utopianism of one world with no borders, no countries, only one language, race mixing, total equality between man and woman. And he bases that. You see, now the great trick for religionists becomes to base these totally modern insights on their own tradition. And so to find elements within their tradition that somehow, can be turned to lead to these totally modern insights. The same thing you had in India with the Arya Samaj, which tried to force Hinduism into the mode of egalitarianism. Partly correctly, they insisted that in the Vedas there was no caste system, and this is correct. This is true. In the family books of the Rig Veda, you find no trace of caste. You find Rishi saying, "Oh, my father was a craftsman, a carpenter, or something," whereas me, I am a poet. So you see that caste rules like the heredity of profession don't apply yet. So this notion of what modern Marxists call ur-communism, primeval communism, they are not entirely fantasistic, they're not entirely fanciful. And so in the case of the caste system and the Vedas, they do apply. In the Vedas, you did have equality in that sense. You did not have a caste system, which only came about later. But so at any rate, their obsession was to find equality within Hindu tradition. They partly succeeded, but the point I'm noting for now is that they felt compelled to discover equality in their own tradition. Now, finally, this is my last page. Um, Nowadays, you see, all these historical details are not known to most people and maybe not so important in this argument. Um, what they will simply say is this. In a polytheist system, heaven is divided. There are a number of different gods, and some are more partisan to this god and some more to the other one. And that may give different rights and so inequality. Whereas in monotheism, there is only one God, and all are children of God. And that's the basis for egalitarianism. Now, the fact of history is that this maxim, that all are children of God, this has coexisted with inequality in real life. Most of history, you had a king and his subjects. You had the aristocracy and the commoners. You, of course, had man and woman. Um, so there can be plenty of inequality, all while all are children of God. And in India, you have something similar. In independent India, there is a pop Hindu equivalent that has become very popular, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family. which is not very original. Many people think, oh, look, you see, we Hindus are better than everyone else because we say that the whole world is one family. Well, that's the most banal saying that there is. Because it means the same thing as the Christian saying that all are children of God. You know, if all are children of God, then they are all one family, right? Um, and in fact, this is not a classical Hindu saying in the sense of an authoritative saying. It appears somewhere, I think, in the Hitopadesha, and the meaning is not so good. In fact, the meaning is that, what is it again? There's a jackal plotting to kill a deer and eat it. And so, in order to gain the deer's confidence, he says, "Oh, but the whole world is one family." And there's a crow who overhears this, and he says, "Well, watch out with this fellow. He's up to no good." And so he keeps an eye on this. And when the jackal has really gained the confidence of the deer, he wants to strike and eat the deer. And that's when the crow intervenes. I don't know, plucks out the eyes of the jackal. I don't know, but at any rate, he interferes and he stops the jackal from killing the deer. And so the moral of that story is only knaves say that the whole world is one family. Only fools believe that the whole world is one family. Wise people don't believe it, right? So, you know, if many Hindus say now, oh, the whole world is one family, that's what we Hindus say, then they don't know their own tradition very well. However, there is a Vedanta equivalent, which is that every self, that is to say, every sentient being, not only human beings, uh, equals Brahma. That's the basic philosophy of Vedanta. Atma equals Brahma. So since your Atma and my Atma and so on all equal Brahma, we are all equal. So you see the Vedantic view of human beings or sentient beings justifies egalitarianism. Well, for the same reason as in the Christian case, this is not really true. The fact that there is a metaphysical equality, that they're all Atma or that they're all children of God, does not imply social equality. It does not take away the existing inequalities. A child has an Atma and an adult has an Atma, and yet they're not equal. So the latter cannot be based on the former. Social equality cannot be based on metaphysical equality. So you see, monotheism, it was a nice try, but no, it cannot take credit for the principle of equality. Thank you. Any questions?
I would like you to tell more about the Zainab case and also the Rebecca and the particular cases you mentioned.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, the Zainab case is well known in anti-Muslim polemic, but okay. Um, so the Prophet had an adopted son. He had a biological son, but he died in infancy. But that was Qasim. But here you see he had an adopted son. I think he was called Said, and so that son took a wife, Zainab, who didn't think much of him because he was not so important. She was well, there's an ugly name for it in American English, but a woman who likes to have important men. And so she wanted the Prophet himself. And so one day the Prophet goes to visit his adopted son, and it's the wife who opens, and she's in half naked condition. probably on purpose. And so Muhammad falls in love with her, as was her intention. And then he prevails upon his son to divorce his wife so that she becomes available for Muhammad himself. But you see, this is against Arab tribal custom because of the incest taboo. You cannot marry anyone from your own family. You cannot marry your sister or your daughter. Now, a daughter-in-law, even if it is with an adoptive rather than a biological son, counts as a daughter. So you can't marry her. So the Muhammad's friends say, look, sorry, but you can't do this. Then he gets a revelation. Allah speaks to him and says it's okay for this time. So, that says something about the nature of revelation, of course. Aisha, of course, uh, she uh, she comments, that Allah, He really serves your purposes really very well. And so this is in fact part of the general critique of the process of revelation that, it's not trustworthy at all. You see, this is a proof the revelation is fake. I mean, revelation is a psychological process, you see, which is self-serving. And, you shouldn't really think that God is speaking. What does God care about the marriage rights of some human being? God lives in eternity and we live for a few decades. Uh, so, but anyway, so he succeeds in doing that. And so the same happens to Moses. You see, Moses also wants to have a woman that he is not supposed to have. In this case, it's an exogamous relation. It's a foreign woman. And I mean, anti-racists would also make much of the fact that she's black. That's not really the issue here. The fact that she's foreign, even if she was white or yellow or anything, doesn't make a difference. The fact that she's foreign, that she's not from the Israelite tribe, that makes her taboo to him. And so his brother and sister tell him, this is not, you shouldn't do this. And then again, he produces a revelation. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. In this case, it's okay. Well, but so in this case, he gets away with it. In other cases, people don't get away with it. Now, this is the case with Esau. Esau is the son of Rebekah and of Isaac. And so he marries to Hittite women. And so his mother is very unhappy about this. Whereas her second son goes to the family. So there he falls in love with his nieces because they're very endogamous, okay? You can't marry your sister, but you can marry your niece, as Muslims still do. Um, so she's happy with his choice. And so she says, okay, go there and stay there for a while. That's safer, that your brother doesn't get angry. You see, then he comes back with his two wives as well as with their two maid servants. He makes children on all four of them. But so when the father is old and going to die, he wants to pass on the authority as the head of the family. And so she intrigues to make sure that this authority is passed on to the younger son, to Jacob, because his progeny is fully Israelite. Whereas in the case of Esau, it is ethnically corrupted, so to speak. And so that's another case of how important the endogamy rule is. Then a next example, and this is really the first genocide, if I may use a very big term that's described in the Bible, where um, the daughter of, well, we just mentioned Dina. Now, she falls in love with a certain Shechem, the son of Hamor, who is a Hivite, another tribe. And so they get married. This marriage is arranged. So the father of the family, Jacob, he agrees, to marry off his daughter to this Shechem. Yet, you see, the sons, the 12 sons, are not satisfied. And so they storm the village and they kill all the men. That's again a sign of how serious Andogan is being taken. Now, I'm sure that in Hindu history, similar things have also happened. You know, that there have been cases of honor killing, not within the Muslim community, but within Hindu society for caste reasons. If somebody married someone from the wrong caste, this was creating anger in his own family or the other party's family. And sometimes this led to violence. Now, I am not at all pleading in favor of this or anything. I'm just saying is that this was at that time a reality of life in Israel as much as in India. So, you see, on a point like this, Bible thumpers cannot teach lessons to Hindus. You see, we all have to set our house in order. But in this case, you shouldn't look for answers in the Bible.
Sir, I have a question. So-called Hindu parties advocating for uniform civil code. In my opinion, it is kind of promoting single code, single law, and uniformity and singularity. It is indirectly promotion of the Hindu monotheism, legal monotheism. Is it true or wrong?
Yeah, well, behind every form of unity, you can suspect the hand of monotheism. Now, I wouldn't look for it that far. Sometimes I don't like the call for unity, like for instance the RSS call of, oh, we Hindus need unity. And whatever you come up with, whatever practical idea, whatever practical proposal, you say, oh no, but first we need unity, unity, unity. You see, that is totally silly. First of all, unity is something that comes automatically. It's just like happiness. It's something that is sometimes given to you, but that you can't earn. Sometimes you feel happy, sometimes just suddenly you feel happy. But sometimes you succeed in life, you have everything you want, and you're still not happy. You can't make that for yourself, it just happens. And unity, the same thing. You see, if the Indian cricket team plays against Pakistan, I'm sure that in Indian Muslims that will create a feeling of suspicious loyalty. But if India plays against England, I'm very sure that throughout India, 100%, you have total unity. Everybody's cheering for the Indian team. Okay, so sometimes you have a cause that you all stand behind, or you have an enemy that you're all against, and then you have unity. And that's all you can say about unity. So don't make a fetish, don't make an idol of this unity. Okay? Um, Now, in the case of a uniform civil code, well, I wouldn't call that monotheism in the sense that it's precisely the Muslims, the monotheists par excellence, who are against the uniform civil code. Okay? They want their own law system, and it's for them it is a concession to Hindus that they can have another law system. But so Hindus who want a common civil code, they need to impose it upon the minorities. Now, Christians won't have much of a problem with that. But since, I mean, in Christian countries, it's common civil code is the normal thing. Even in the Roman Empire, Christians had to adapt to whatever law, the Roman Empire proclaimed. And so, in India, they won't make trouble about declaring a common civil code. But the Muslims, of course, will, because their separate civil code is supposed to be laid down by God Himself. And if human beings tinker with that, that's evil. So you see, if these silly unbelievers want to have their own democracy and their own, parliamentary civil code, that's their problem. But we Muslims, we don't want that. We want the divine civil code. And so, if you're strong enough, of course, you can force the Muslims to abide by a common civil code. I don't think in India that is the case at the moment. And it's just not important. You see, for Hindus too, it is a fairly new development to have a civil code common to all Hindus. Because in the past, different castes, different sampradayas and so on had their own system. And so I don't know the law books, the Dharma Shastras very thoroughly, but I know, for instance, that for serious crimes, anyone could get the death penalty except Brahmins. They could never, whatever penalty they could get, it would never be the death penalty. Or conversely, some things were forbidden to Brahmins that were perfectly okay for others, like public drunkenness. You see, if you were the keeper of the sacred texts that were supposed to be very auspicious, that were supposed to be the backbone of the prosperity of the nation, then you had to take those very seriously. If you get drunk and from your memory you produce some Vedic verse and start to make a mockery of it, that's very negative. And so therefore you are not allowed to be drunk. And if a Brahmin is drunk, he can get a fine or some punishment. Whereas for a laborer, this is a normal thing. And so Hinduism did not traditionally have a common civil code. Different classes of people had different codes. Like, for instance, between men and women. If a robber was caught, and was sentenced, he could get severely punished. His wife, who was in on the operation, who was fully cooperating in the robbery, she could not be punished because she was doing her duty. A Hindu wife is supposed to follow her husband. So if her husband tells her, okay, you see, you do this and this in my stealing operation, and she does it, then she's not committing a crime. No, she's obeying her husband, which is what she should do. And so all the guilt is on the husband, not on her. And so similarly, there are numerous examples of how Hindu society traditionally did not have a common civil code. It's a very new thing. And I'm in favor of a common civil code. And I guess by now most Hindus are also. But you see, it's not a priority. You can live with not having a common civil code for a while. Ultimately, it should be there. Of course, it's only correct. But if it means, as it would mean at the moment, that you get everyone against you, that, practically speaking, it would mean that you get riots from every mosque in India. All the imams and all the muftis and so on would feel very personally offended. And so they would raise hell, compared to which the agitation this February against the CAA is absolutely nothing. And then the whole world is going to stand up. Look, these ugly, vicious, majoritarian Hindus are oppressing the poor, hapless Muslims. Now, maybe one day you see that there's a little trouble you have to go through, but I think at the moment that's very counterproductive. Knowing the present BJP leadership, that will only cow them and make them even more obedient to whatever secularist pressure exists on them. So right now, I'd say that can wait. When times are more auspicious, when you've influence the Muslims in the right direction, that they themselves accept it, then okay. But for now, there are far more urgent things to do.
Uh, uh, Two questions. One is a question related to the Bible. You stated that Israel had such strong endogamy laws, and yet
Yes,
Messiah is supposed to appear in a lineage where the greatest kings, David and Solomon, David took a Hittite wife, Bathsheba, and
yes,
Solomon took wives from all nations.
yes.
So, how is this reconciled
Well,
in now Christian theology? That
well, in Christian theology is not important because those endogamy laws don't count for Christians. I mean, all the Israelite laws have been abolished. Like Christians can eat pork, so these endogamy laws don't count for Christians. Now, uh, practically, of course, there was a certain power equation. The king can afford a lot more than other people can. Um, and then the strict monotheism probably didn't exist yet. You see, the Bible claims that strict monotheism starts with Moses, who in the burning bush sees Yahweh appear, sees God appear. And so from then on it starts, and then he gets a revelation on Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments and so on, that start with Jewish law. Now, modern scholars say this full monotheism may have existed as an ideology here and there, very minoritarian, but Israel at the time as a nation was still polytheist and had many different strands of theology within it. It's only in the 8th century BC that you get full state monotheism. And then it is back projected. And so King David and King Solomon are made the heroes of this monotheist tradition. Whereas in reality, there is not much of it. So Solomon, of course, he had many foreign wives who brought in foreign idol codes. That's also described and scandalized. And so it's no surprise within this monotheist vision that after Solomon, the whole thing falls apart. And so there are two kingdoms after that. One of them even gets picked in by the Assyrians, the people led away, the lost tribes of Israel. Then the southern kingdom is also taken over by the Babylonians with the exile, the destruction of the temple, and so on. But so all this misery, or much of it, is attributed to King Solomon's dallying with idolatry. Similarly, King David, with his Hittite wife, well, in principle, you see, he had Israelite wives, and his sons should have come from among them. But it so happens that indeed, you see, he lusted after Bathsheba. He arranged to have her husband killed in war. And then he took her, and so her son becomes then King Solomon. You see, that is also quite criticized. And here, in the traditional explanation, certainly in Christianity, I think also in Judaism, is that it's a great sin of David to lust after this Bathsheba. And so there is a prophet, Nathan, who famously speaks truth to power. He protests against the king doing this. And we learn that from a moralistic perspective, that King David is lustful, he's greedy. He has so many wives already, and then he wants this man's wife also. But maybe there is also an angle of tribal endogamy to it. Maybe Prophet Nathan also objected to the fact that he was lusting after a foreign wife. And so I leave in the middle. You see, that would entirely fit the total picture of endogamy, of the objection against intermarriage, but I leave it in the middle. It's an interesting.
Throughout this talk, you talked about egalitarianism in the sense that all people are equal before law and in the sense of social hierarchy. But what
Yes.
about egalitarianism between men and women? Specifically, what do you say to the argument that goddess-based religions, whether in India or in ancient Greece, Rome, whatever, are all women-friendly? I mean, what is your response to this kind of argument?
Well, not necessarily. Um, there is a serial on TV about the Queen of Britain, and I just saw one scene of it. I don't follow the serial, but in another program, the scene from it was shown, and it's a talk between the Queen and her then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And so this is a talk between two power women, and yet Margaret Thatcher says, yes, in my cabinet, yeah, it's true what you say. There's no woman there except me. But frankly speaking, when I look at all the candidates, what I notice about women is that they're not fit for high office. They're too emotional. So you see, as a woman, you can go very far and do all the things a man does, and yet share the usual masculine opinions about women. And so, it's just a simile for the general principle that if you have a goddess cult, it doesn't mean you're more woman friendly, that you're more feminist, that you're more egalitarian. Um, I also remember a leftist theater maker who was portraying with a few volunteers different social problems in different countries. So about Mexico, he was going into the problem of machismo, the tough men who control the women and so on. And so he shows the women all praying, kneeling before the statue of the Virgin Mary. And so the cult of the Virgin Mary is very prominent in Mexico. And so, yeah, the women find some solace, but that doesn't mean that in daily life they're treated more egalitarian. On the contrary, the more they're being bullied by their husbands and brothers and so on, the more they turn to the Virgin for, solace, for consolation. So I haven't noticed in India, but then you see my familiarity with the common people in India is quite limited. But I haven't noticed that Shaktic communities are more woman friendly. I mean, the role division between men and women is usually the same. So changing that is now, of course, in the modern context, more in evidence. But no, that I don't see. So the connection between worshipping women and respecting women is not so outspoken.